This is Love Notes, daily devotions from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Grace and peace to you. Our text today is Romans, the first chapter, verses 18 through 32. It's kind of a long section. Having declared powerfully for us that God's grace is for everyone, and that God has the power by grace, through faith, to save all, the question might be, then what's the big deal? It's all done. It's all taken care of. And then questions may arise. Why is there evil in the world? Why is there suffering? Paul is not naive. Paul understands that this is a spiritual struggle that we face. And so now he turns to talk about the wrath of God. He says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of those who by their wickedness suppress the truth." The wrath of God. What is it that Paul means by the wrath of God? The wrath of God comes not when God sends divine lightning bolts into our lives to punish us and to harm us. I don't believe that the stories that we see in the Old Testament, in Exodus or in Genesis, of even Sodom and Gomorrah, are to be taken as a revelation of a God who waits for a moment to destroy. God is always in the business of saving, and if you read those stories carefully, you'll see what I mean. Now, the wrath of God happens when we turn our back on that God and we experience separation and alienation from God. Paul is going to tell us in this book of Romans that sin is alienation from God, to be separated. And so the wrath of God is that God will not go everywhere with us. Not every dumb idea, not every evil thought, not every harm and violent thing that we perpetrate will be accepted by God. And when we choose those things, we're alienated, we're separated from God. And that is wrath. God says, I won't go there. And so you're on your own. That's what he means when he says the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness, things that are done that don't have any God in them, and wickedness. Things are the opposite of what God intends for us, by those who are wicked and suppress the truth. How is a person wicked? Is it by their nature? Well, I know there's a whole lot of debate that we could have about that, and certainly there is a ton of biology and all kinds of scientific study that says that a certain amount of the bad things we do can be attributed to the chemistry and the mechanistic part of being human. But nurture and the choices we make are also a part of that. We do wicked things, well, because it's self-serving. That might be part of our DNA. We look out for number one quite naturally. But then when we enjoy it, well, we cultivate that. So ungodliness and wickedness is associated with ungodly, wicked people. Not because they're destined to do this, but because they nurture themselves into doing this over and over again. Paul makes an assertion that I'm not sure we buy these days. He says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made." If you look at creation and the bounty of it, the beauty of it, if you just look around the world, you will see that God is goodness, God is love, God is abundance, God is all of these things. And to act against that is to reject what is plain as plain as the nose on our faces. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature has been with us. For they knew God, but they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. Is this Jews or Gentiles? It's anybody who didn't honor God as creator. They became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. There's a lot of dark minds in this world today, and I would have to include my own at times. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling a mortal human being, or birds, or four-footed animals, or reptiles. Here Paul is explaining in kind of a history of religions way how it is that humans ended up worshiping, little stone statues and images of lions and tigers and bears, oh my. This is a controversial statement in the Roman Empire because there's still a whole lot of idolatry that is part of the Roman religions and the mythology that takes place there. Paul is explaining that when humans go their own way, they get lost and they end up worshiping the wrong thing. That's what the prophets have been teaching all along in the Old Testament. Sin is idolatry, which manifests itself in all kinds of ways. We're a little more sophisticated, maybe today, in that we don't have little stone statues that we worship, but we certainly have a whole bunch of symbols in our lives that can supplant God's power, The almighty dollar, the commodities and goods that we buy, that we lust after. How many of us have to have that latest iPhone, or how many of us have to constantly find new ways in which we feed the hole that never seems to fill up within us? Those are signs of idolatry, gods that cannot do what we hope they can. Paul goes on, he says, therefore, when they began to worship idols, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts. I guess it was a choice between destroying everything, as we saw in the story of the flood, or giving up. It doesn't say that God rejected them. He gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to degrading their bodies. He let them do what they desired to do. And I'm sure God wept and shook the divine head, knowing that it was a terrible choice. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. Here we come to a thing that is very much part of our living today. Worshiping the creature rather than the Creator. We worship ourselves, the creature, rather than the Creator. We worship our political party, our philosophical views. We worship our favorite teams. We worship all kinds of things that are creatures rather than the Creator. That new pickup or car, that bigger house with an extra garage, none of that is going to be able to fill the spirit of the human being, because it's worshiping the creature, the created thing, instead of worshiping the Creator. So Paul continues here to talk about the things that were a result of the idolatry. In these next several verses, he names some things that are sexual improprieties, and that some scholars I respect, use to point out that we shouldn't be condoning any kind of homosexual or sexual orientations other than male and female. Their women exchange natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way also men giving up natural intercourse with women were consumed with passion for one another, and on it goes. And so we point to these 3 or 4 verses and we say, see there, that's where it tells us in Paul's letters that homosexuality is a sin. I don't buy the argument because I think Paul is just piling up examples of what happens when we worship the creature instead of the creator. Is it true that someone with a different sexual orientation is always, therefore, in their sexual relationships, worshiping the creature rather than the creator? I don't think so, any more than it is when men and women love each other. There are plenty of examples of heterosexual relationships where the creature is being worshipped instead of the creator. It's why the divorce rate is so high, I think. Making promises before God kind of go the way of the dodo bird when the only reason that we stay married is to answer the question, what do I get out of this? So I don't buy, and I'm not alone, that these verses were Paul trying to condemn a particular behavior. He's using examples of all kinds of different things: idol worship, lies, exchanging truth for lies, and then these sexual behaviors as examples of the way in which people can worship the creature instead of the creator. And then he bookends it, which strengthens, I think, the argument. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, they went back to idolatry here. God gave them up to a debased mind and to things that should not be done. They were filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, craftiness. See, here's another big pile of examples of ways that we worship the creature instead of the creator. None of these are worse or better than the other. But before we go about judging people, which is going to be Paul's next subject, we better certainly take a look and see if envy, murder, strife, deceit, craftiness, gossip, slander, or any of the other things in this list are part of our daily lives. If we engage in these things, we also engage in the idolatry that can't tell the difference between the creature and the creator. They know God's decree. Paul has a sense in which the human conscience knows when things are wrong, and yet we do them anyway because we are sinful people. Because we take care of ourselves before we take care of others. And when that happens, then idolatry reigns, and the wrath of God is upon us, not as some kind of divine punishment from the heavens, but as separation and alienation from the source of life and love. That's the wrath of God. That we can find neither mercy or grace, love or justice if we confuse the creature and the creator. Amen.